Welcome everybody to Watershed Wednesday. My name is Leah Kongjun. I'm from the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. We'll just give a few seconds for other people to join us. But if this is your first time attending our webinars, welcome. We have a very special presentation today on watershed planning in Alberta. And also, just so you know, is that these webinars are recorded. And so if you want to share the presentation with somebody who perhaps didn't get to see the presentation, or you have to leave a little bit early, they're always recorded and on our NSWA YouTube channel. So you can just go to our website and connect fairly easily to find that.
Wonderful instructions, Leah.
Oh. Thank you.
That's Stan.
Oh, thank you, Stan. So before we get started, I would like to recognize that the traditional lands and territories that our province shares with our Indigenous partners. So Canada actually spans 11 treaty areas, and there's actually 5 within Alberta, but the majority are covered by treaties 6, 7, and 8. Alberta is also home to 8 Métis settlements, and the Métis Nation of Alberta recognizes the 6 regions. So you'll see this on this great map that was put together by the Alberta Teachers Association, which I really enjoy their resources if you ever get a chance to look at them. Now, as much as our map here shows boundaries and lines, we also want to respect that the Indigenous peoples and nations have their own ways of relating to the land, the water, and the people that are on it. So very much like ourselves who look at watershed boundaries or look at how Mother Nature divides things, it's not always about the boundaries and lines. It's about fitting in with our natural landscape. So recognizing that we're all treaty peoples, we seek to fulfill the spirit and the intent of all the treaties agreements and understand that this is an ongoing process. And we are all committed to building stronger relationships that build our relationships with the Indigenous peoples within our place, within Alberta, and strive to work together to care for the land, the water, and all living creatures that we share in this beautiful province of Alberta. So a little bit of housekeeping. So please keep your microphones muted and your video off during the presentations. This just helps us a little bit with the bandwidth. And I know many of our attendees from rural areas would likely have their videos off anyway, just to help so that they can stay connected. If you do have a question, please use the chat feature in Zoom, which you'll find at the bottom of your page on your screen. And type it in there, and we'll have staff that are moderating the chat and then pipe in if there's a good spot for asking a question. So as much as we'd like to leave it till the end, I also have told the staff if there's a relevant question and it really fits in with the section we're in, is just to pipe in and just say, hey, we have a question. So the other thing we like to do as part of our Watershed Wednesdays is to have some poll questions. And one, this is a way that we get to interact with you a little bit. And it also helps us understand a little bit more about who is joining us in our presentations. So today we've had over 100 people register, which is really great. It's wonderful always to be able to share information with you. But I'd like to start with the first poll question. And it really is about what sector or kind of what area represents you the best? Like, are you part of a government? Are you an industry rep? Are you an agricultural producer? Are you from one of our First Nations or Indigenous communities? So you should have a box now that you're seeing and you're able to fill it in. And I'm seeing right now is that people are filling in the question. We've got about 45 people responding. And we'll just give it a second so that we can try to get the majority of you. Okay, Michelle, let's share that. So it looks like the majority of people today are from a nonprofit organization, so about 34%, and then municipal government representatives, which is awesome, provincial government, and industry. And we also have one attendee from First Nations. So thanks so much for sharing. So the best way for you all to be able to connect with us and learn more about not just the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, but all of the alliances across the province is through our website, which is the link is here. And if you're interested in keeping up to date with Watershed Wednesdays or anything else that we're doing, we do put out a monthly newsletter called InStream, and you can sign up for that on our website. We try to make it short and sweet and, some interesting tidbits about what's going on across the watershed, but also across the province. So sign up for our newsletter if you aren't already. I think we have over 800 people who now subscribe to our newsletter. So again, if you're interested in particularly just the Watershed Wednesdays, we typically hold them the first Wednesday of each month. And this is going to be, I think it's our 12th online webinar. Of course, with the COVID restrictions, we used to have in-person forums twice a year. We've adapted and now do them online, which has actually been one benefit of, a bad situation is that our online webinars have been very popular. And we do plan on continuing them even after the COVID restrictions are lifted. But we also will hopefully be complementing those with in-person forums. I think people really miss the interaction and networking together. So again, if you want to keep track of any of our events, whether they're online or in person, just go to our website, and right at the bottom is we have a what's going on section, and you can check really quickly to see what's coming up. And of course, today is about watershed management in Alberta. But our next one is April 13th, and it's on invasive species. So it is not on the first Wednesday of the month because we needed to adjust because the specialist from Alberta Environment on invasive species was only available on this day. So we really wanted to hear from her and about the provincial situation. So we adjusted it. So hopefully people can again attend. And if you can't, as I mentioned earlier, we are recording this so that you can check them out on our online YouTube station. One of the other things we love to do and our attendees really like is that we do have a gift basket. So we go through the list of the attendees, and at the end of our presentation, we will announce the prize winner. And our gift basket includes a Living in the Shed book, which is all about the North Saskatchewan watershed, as well as one of our popular metal camping mugs with our logo on it, plus a few other things we toss in there as well. So if we do call your name at the end, is just hang out for a little bit and we'll get your address and we'll mail it to you. So with that introduction, I wanted to, start with the topic of today, which is watershed planning in Alberta. And I'm very excited about this. This is a first for the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance. Why is it a first? Is because, excuse me, we're doing this in partner with the other 10 watershed planning advisory councils across Alberta. So we collaborate a lot across the province with our partners. And we all thought with the recent municipal elections, it would be great to have a presentation very high level just about watershed planning in Alberta for our elected officials, but also for any of our stakeholders who are kind of interested in, like, how do we all fit in with watershed planning in Alberta? So the one thing we do all share in common, our watershed planning advisory councils, is that we promote Alberta's Water for Life strategy. And as well, we support in promoting healthy watersheds for all Albertans across the province. So this is kind of a great way of showcasing not only the work that is being done by the province and our other partners, but also specifically in different regions of the province. So today what we're going to cover is a little bit about the Water for Life strategy, some of those key partnerships of the people who help promote and move the strategy forward, some specifics about watershed planning advisory councils like the NSWA, and then a little bit about as a science, like there is a framework that the government has put together and talk a little bit about that. And then today I'm lucky to have 3 other executive directors from other WPACs across the province who are going to be helping share examples of watershed projects across the province. So we definitely will introduce you to each one of them, but just so you have a bit of a teaser. So we have Petra Rowell from the Athabasca Watershed Council. We have Megan Payne from the Lesser Slave Lake Watershed Council. Hi, Megan. And then Shannon Frank from the Old Man Watershed Council. So you get the whole cross-section of Alberta in this presentation. So the Water for Life strategy. So this is a Government of Alberta strategy that was developed in the early 2000s, in 2003. And really what it does is it draws attention to water. And water really is the foundation of our way of life here in Alberta. You know, we sometimes forget how important water is to our day-to-day living. But events like, you know, the recent low water levels and droughts, or the floods the year before, or say blue-green algae advisories, or drinking water advisories, really bring it back to us and how important water is to all Albertans. So the Government of Alberta, you know, recognizing that this was such an important aspect to all Albertans, created the Water for Life strategy in 2003. And it really has the three goals: safe, secure drinking water supplies, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable quality water supplies for a sustainable economy. And the strategy also really recognizes that water management is a shared responsibility. And no one agency can really manage water alone, and it's a public resource, so that Albertans also have to have a part in managing it. And I believe that that's really what the government heard in the early 2000s, is that residents really wanted to have some say in how we managed our water. So who are some of these key partners in the Water for Life strategy? So the number one, of course, is the Government of Alberta, and they're really the one that's responsible and accountable for the strategy. And oftentimes our watershed planning and advisory councils will have representatives from the government on our boards or on our technical committees to help move this forward. Another great group to recognize is the Alberta Water Council. And really they are a group, again, like us, a nonprofit group, kind of arm's length from the government, that really looks at provincial scale and policy advice to the government. So for example, the wetland policy is a provincial policy, and the Water Council, you know, when it was becoming developed and as it's being implemented, you know, provides advice or information to the government on that policy. That's just one example. The other group is, of course, groups like NSWA, Watershed Planning and Advisory Council. And it's a mouthful. A lot of times you get us heard, or you hear us being referred to as WPACs. And we're responsible for watershed planning at the major river scale. So there's 11 of us, one for each of the major water rivers and or water bodies in the province. And then last but not least is our watershed stewardship groups. And these are really often resident-led local groups that do on the ground education and sort of restoration projects. And they really look at, again, promoting watershed health at a local scale. So together, the four key partners work together to promote the Water for Life strategy. And I've just put the link here to the Alberta Environment webpage, where you can find more information about these partnerships. So specifically on watershed planning and advisory councils, again, there are 11 of us across the province, and you can see we go right from the north, from the Mighty Peace Watershed Alliance, down right to the south to the Milk River Watershed Council. And most of us represent a major basin, but we also have groups such as the Lesser Slave Watershed Council that Megan is around a lake water body. And so we're independent, nonprofit organizations that are designated by the Government of Alberta to report on the health of watersheds. Plus, we have 4 key roles, which we're going to get into and provide examples of as we move down. So recently, the Watershed Planning and Advisory Councils created a brochure and a report on just the work of each one of our groups across the province. So we each do significant work in our major watersheds. But when you look at us across the province, it really is an amazing story. So I put a link here to where you can get this resource, or if you belong to another WPAC, they will also probably have a link to this. And the report on Alberta's Watershed Planning Advisory Councils was recently updated for 2020-2021, which again has some really interesting and informative facts on the work that we do across the province. So just a little bit more information about us. So again, there's 11 of us. We're all nonprofit societies. We have approximately 40 plus staff between all 11 of us. So most of our offices have somewhere between 2 to 4 staff. So we're pretty small, but we are managed by a board. So each of us, because we're a nonprofit society, has a board, and it is multi-sector. It is supposed to have representatives from all the groups across our watershed, all the stakeholders that might be represented. And for example, on the NSWA board, we have representatives from the provincial government, from federal government, from municipal governments, from Indigenous communities, industry, nonprofit organizations, agriculture, and members at large. So it is quite a large group. And these are all volunteers. So over 150 volunteer directors work with the 11 WPACs across the province. And then of course we have a membership. So each nonprofit society has a membership, and we get together in our annual general meetings. And there are over 450 organizations that belong to WPAC societies, and over 4,300 individual society members. So we have a really good representation of real Albertans on each of our WPACs. A question we often get is about our financial support. So how do we exist? Well, the government of Alberta does provide us with funding for our core operations. So it's about $3 million for the 11 WPACs that we have to divide between us. But even more importantly is we get about $2 million worth of in-kind support. So again, that's our volunteers, like our board members or our on-the-ground volunteers that help us with events or plantings. And then we leverage the money that we get from the government of Alberta to apply for other grants or to get contributions from other organizations. So as much as the province might give us about 30% of our funding, 50% of our funding comes from other sources, whether that's grants or contributions from our other sector holders. And then this in turn typically gets injected into our local economy. When we apply for a grant, we'll do a project, and oftentimes we'll hire a consultant, or we'll rent a hall, we'll do workshops, we'll engage with other businesses in the community to actually complete these projects. So I think this is an important story to tell as well. So as much as WPACs, receive money, we also really generate a benefit to our communities, our local communities, and Alberta as a whole. So that's a little bit about our watershed planning and advisory councils, and just a little bit of a touch. Again, I encourage you to try to read the summary on what we do because it's got a lot more detail. So watershed planning in Alberta, there is a framework. So the government of Alberta, after the Water for Life strategy, developed this watershed planning framework. So how are we going to study our watersheds? How are we going to know what the issues are and what problems need to be addressed, or what areas are we doing really great in? And the framework really revolves around an adaptive circle. So there are guiding documents that you can find at the link on the bottom of the slide, the Guide to Watershed Management Planning in Alberta, and handbooks or guides for each specific stage. So typically, a WPAC or a Watershed Planning Advisory Council will start with what's called a State of the Watershed report. And it really tries to outline a snapshot in time. What is the condition of the watershed at that time? And it really looks at what information is available, what do we know about the watershed, and then it moves forward from that. So once you get a picture, and oftentimes that picture says there's not a lot of information, so you need to go out and collect it. But once you get that information, then the next step really is to develop what's called an integrated watershed management plan. And you do this in collaboration with your stakeholders. And this plan really identifies what are the issues and what are you going to do about it. Then, of course, you have to do your monitoring and evaluation reporting. So you said you're going to do something, how are you going to monitor it, how are you going to do it? And then again, most importantly, probably is then how are we going to adapt? So after a certain length of time, after you've monitored it, you're going, oh, there's a trend, we need to address it. And you have to go into that adaptive management circle. That's a very high level overview of the framework. And again, I encourage you to go to the Alberta Environment webpage if you want more information on it. Now, I just wanted to share some examples. So almost all of our watershed planning advisory councils have completed state of the watershed reports for their watersheds. These are just some examples of them. And really, again, it includes information, a snapshot in time of what data is available. What information do we know about the health of the watershed? What is the watershed health based on some key indicators of watershed health that, again, the province has some guidelines around. And then probably just as importantly is what are the data gaps? What are we missing? So these are just some examples from the red deer, the beaver, Athabasca battle, and old man of their reports. And again, they're all available on their websites. This is just some examples of integrated watershed management plans. So again, the majority of us have completed these plans. We've been in existence since around 2003 to 2007 because we all didn't start at the same time. So we're all at different spots. But most of us have completed these. These are just examples from the Milk and the Mighty Peace and the Lesser Slave and the Bow. Some examples of our integrated watershed management plans. So we've talked about the state of the watershed reports that most of us have completed. Majority of us have done our watershed management plans. And then it comes, the monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. And again, this is quite involved and it does take a lot of time and resources. Things like water quality monitoring or water use or the water quantity issues within a watershed, or specifically looking at a specific water body, such as the example of Siwa here at the Southeast Alberta Watershed Alliance on a specific creek. And it's not just about the water, because watershed health is also about the land. So we might also do reports on biodiversity, not only on the land, but also aquatic health. We also look at best management practices around land use planning, because land use planning is also a very big indicator of watershed health. These are just a few more examples, and they can be very specific or issue specific. Can also address groundwater, riparian areas. And a great example of a specific water issue one was the one that Bo did after the big floods in 2013. So as I mentioned earlier, this kind of gives you a picture of what are the watershed planning and advisory councils? What is the watershed planning framework like in Alberta? Again, very high level. But I'd like to delve into a little bit more detail about key responsibilities of the watershed planning advisory councils. And these are being convener collaborators, monitoring and reporting, policy and planning, and education and outreach. And for this section, what I'm going to do is each of those sections is we're going to have a different executive director talk about and provide examples from different parts of the province about that. But before we do that, I would like to do the second poll, which is really going to be interesting because it's just about what watershed are you from? So Michelle, if you could share the poll. So the catch with this is it only allows us to have 10 choices. And of course, there's 11 watersheds across the province. So we had to group the Battle and the North Saskatchewan together. So if you can see that poll, please fill in which watershed that you are from. Awesome.
not
Michelle,
seeing the poll yet.
yeah, Michelle, you might have to try that again.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, because I was like, nobody's answering. Okay.
Oh, it disappeared again. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Nope.
No, it's not giving me the option to launch it for some reason.
Okay. No worries, Michelle. We can try to do it at the end of the session. I am eager to pass this over to Petra Rowell, who is the executive director from the Athabasca Water Council, to talk on this. Oh, now we're getting the poll.
Quick,
Okay.
everybody, do the poll.
Fill it in, Petra, quick. Oh, wow. Oh, this is awesome. Thank you, guys. I see results. So we've got like 45 responses.
Yay.
Definitely the North Saskatchewan is beating people out because we have fans that come into our Watershed Wednesdays. So let's share that, Michelle. So North Saskatchewan for sure is, about 65% of the respondees. Then we have quite a few from the Bow, Athabasca, Lesser Slave, some from Mighty Peace, Old Man, Red Deer. This is awesome. So it's really great to see people from all across the province joining us today. Thanks for your patience, Petra. You take it away.
Okay, thanks, Leah. Okay, and we can go to the next slide. So Leah's asked me to talk about the role of WPACs as conveners and collaborators. So yeah, this is another way of thinking about the work that we do. WPACs are really good at creating opportunities for all Albertans to share their perspectives and exchange information and stories about the things that each of us values in our own watershed. And we also, create the forums where we can share our values and also talk about some of the issues that might be affecting those values. WPACs really excel at bringing people together. We convene meetings, we do webinars like this one, we have full day or multi-day forums. And really the purpose of convening is, like I say, to get together, to listen to concerns, to fill information gaps, think about how we can carry out projects and programs. And sometimes even we get together to review different policies and plans that are occurring in our province. These events can address regional issues, but they can also take a regional stakeholder perspective and feed it into a provincial or even a federal level initiative. So we're always thinking about, for me, I'm the executive director of the Athabasca Watershed. So I'm always thinking about what are the issues important to people in the Athabasca and how do I convey that message to provincial and sometimes even federal water initiatives. So a good example for us in the Athabasca is we provided input to the federal government in the species at risk listing for the Athabasca rainbow trout. To give you an idea of the scale of the convening and collaborating that WPACs do, in 2021 alone, WPACs organized more than 40 board meetings. We engaged approximately 185 volunteer board members in discussions about strategic directions, good governance, and water issues unique to each region. We also engaged another 840 volunteers through the work of our committees and project teams. So that's a lot of convening and a lot of collaborating. In addition to these regular activities, we convened or collaborated in a number of unique programs, some of which I'm going to describe in the next couple of slides. Thank you, Leah. So Leah's gone to the next slide. One collaboration that I was really pleased to participate in myself, because it got me out of my office and into the area around Hinton and Catamount in August, which was beautiful. But it was the Eastern Slopes Community-Based Aquatic Monitoring Collaborative. This project was spearheaded by a national organization, Living Lakes Canada, but it also saw the collaboration of 7 WPACs. As you might have noticed looking at that map of Alberta WPACs, 7 of us have our headwaters in the northeast slopes of Alberta. And so we participated in this project that worked to benchmark benthic invertebrates in the Northeast Slopes using the Cabin or Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network protocol. We also used the stream protocol to do some eDNA sampling of benthic invertebrates. This project not only benchmarks benthic communities in our Northeast Slopes, it also lets us look at changes upstream and downstream and also over time. So you can imagine if we keep doing this monitoring, we might learn more about climate change and stream temperature over time, and also about development upstream and downstream. I think for the 7 WPACs that participated in this project, we each had many sponsors, but I wanted to mention for the Athabasca our appreciation to Alberta Conservation Association and Alberta EcoTrust for funding some of this work. The 7 WPACs that participated were the Old Man, Bow, Red Deer, North Saskatchewan, Athabasca, Lesser Slave, and Mighty Peace. Next slide, please, Leah. Another, what I think is an absolutely brilliant collaboration is the Riparian Web Portal. I want to really give hats off to the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance and in particular, Mary Ellen Shane, for having worked for, I'm not sure how long, a number of years now, to work with a consultant, Vieira, to first of all, develop a process for large landscape scale assessment of riparian habitat. And then to also brilliantly have the idea to put it on a publicly accessible website, the Riparian Portal. And today, again, under NSWA's leadership and strong support from the Battle River Watershed Alliance, this is now expanded to 6 watershed councils that have been doing riparian assessments and putting their data on this publicly accessible web portal. So today you can see more than 25,000 kilometers of shoreline riparian assessment. So if you can see the map, you can see areas where riparian intactness is poor versus where it's good or intact at least. This data is being used by more and more people all the time. It's used by, not only stewardship groups, but farmers and ranchers being able to go online and finding their local water body and seeing what the condition of their riparian edge is. I know a lot of county agricultural fieldmen are using this website. Lots of conservation groups like Trout Unlimited and Highway 2 Conservation. And again, there's many sponsors, but in particular, I think the Alberta Environment's Watershed Restoration and Resilience Program has been a big supporter of this collaboration. Next slide, please. I think it's really important to note here under the role of convening and collaborating is that WPACs aren't just collaborating together with ourselves, with 11 of us. We're also reaching out to many, many other groups provincially and nationally. Really, we are convening and collaborating with all sectors of Alberta society, including conservation and restoration agencies, academics and researchers, industries like forestry and oil and gas and agriculture, all levels of government, and even more and more seeing greater outreach with Indigenous communities. I also want to point out that collaborations are not just focused on environmental outcomes, that many of these collaborations are also trying to address social and economic and cultural values as well. This is a good example here by the Red Deer River Watershed Alliance, reaching out and working with the Nature Conservancy of Canada on a project that looks at mapping hydrologically significant areas that benefit many aspects of society by thinking about areas of the watershed that impact water quality, flood mitigation, and drought resilience. Next slide, please. And just a final point that I'll make is that convening does not always have to happen in the boardroom. Many, many times we convene out in the watershed, which is where we really all want to be. WPAC collaboration is great for organizing and getting people out on the landscape, making physical improvements to the watershed. this is what, at the end of the day, this is what we're all about and really where we want to be. And it's great to see more and more collaborations getting more people out into the watershed to conserve and restore and protect. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Megan Payne, the Executive Director of the Lesser Slave Watershed Council, to talk about monitoring and reporting.
Petra. As Leah mentioned earlier, WPACs have a role in monitoring and reporting on the health and condition of our watershed. And we don't mean just water quality. There's a whole host of indicators that contribute to a healthy watershed. So monitoring and reporting is one of the key roles of WPACs in Alberta. And why? Because we need to be able to share the condition of our watershed with stakeholders. So the Lesser Slave Watershed Council, and I'm assuming all of the other WPACs, went through the process of compiling information about their watershed on a suite of indicators and pulling it together into a State of the Watershed report. So State of the Watershed report is a snapshot of the health of the watershed at a point in time based on the information that is available to us. So WPACs collect information. The government of Alberta has a lot of information on water quality, water flows. Other partners, for example, in our part of the world, we have the Boreal Center for Bird Conservation. So we have a lot of bird data in our region. Pulling all that together into a State of the Watershed report that can be used by us, obviously, as WPACs, our stakeholders such as municipalities, our provincial government partners, industry partners. And these State of the Watershed reports also inform the development of integrated watershed management plans, which I believe is our next topic. So another important part of going through the process of developing a State of the Watershed report is to identify where we may have data gaps that are preventing us from making an accurate assessment of our watershed condition. So in order to fill some of these data gaps and better understand our watersheds, many of the WPACs are engaging in various monitoring activities to collect information, whether it's water quality, riparian health, benthic invertebrate health. As we've heard, monitoring activities can include all sorts of things and can be done by a variety of partners. Next slide, please. So I can speak quite a bit to this project, as this one is led by the Lesser Slave Watershed Council. We've been conducting water quality monitoring on the tributaries that flow into Lesser Slave Lake for about 5 years. And why did we start this? Back in 2008, we did our first State of the Watershed report, and we recognized that there's major data gaps for a lot of the indicators in our watershed. So one of the major things that came out of that report was that we need to do more monitoring and focus in on the key parameters that we need information on. Also, in our part of the Upper Athabasca region, there are no river network monitoring stations, and the water quality monitoring that is done on Lesser Slave Lake is pretty sporadic. It's been about every 10 to 15 years historically. So there wasn't a great record, and there was not a lot of consistency. So fast forward a few years, when we began doing our integrated watershed management plan, some of these data gaps prevented us from being able to set water quality objectives for some of our tributaries and for Lesser Slave Lake itself. So one of the high priority actions out of our IWMP was to implement a tributary monitoring program. So that's why we got started. So this program began in 2017, and we selected 16 sites along 5 rivers that flow into Lesser Slave Lake. And the sites were picked at an upstream, mid, and lower reach of the river, lower being as close to the lake as we could get, and upper being as far up into the headwaters as we could get. So 2022 will be our 6th year of this program, and we're actually just waiting for our 5-year summary report, and I'll be sure to make sure that that's available online. And the resources for this project have came from the forest industry through the Forest Resource Improvement Program grants, and from donations and sponsorships from various oil and gas operators in our watershed. And we've also received in-kind support from Alberta Environment and Parks staff who helped with program design and staff training, and a few other consultants along the way. Next slide. Another great example of WPAC monitoring and reporting is the North Saskatchewan's Watershed Monitoring Program. And that's a collaboration between the NSWA, the Government of Alberta, the City of Edmonton, and EPCOR. So by combining and coordinating resources, they've created the most comprehensive river monitoring program in Alberta. And it encompasses 19 stations all the way from the headwaters to the Saskatchewan border. And the North Saskatchewan River is a source of drinking water for more than 65 communities, including the Edmonton Capital Region. And this project has been funded by a 4-year, $4 million commitment from EPCOR, along with a bunch of in-kind support from various environment and parks staff and the North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance and the City of Edmonton. So this program improves data collection both upstream and downstream of Edmonton, allowing all partners, all levels of government and water operators to make informed decisions about protecting and preserving water in the North Saskatchewan River. And this program's collaborative approach to aquatic ecosystem monitoring at the river basin scale is unique to Alberta. It's a really great project, and I know that there's more information about it on the NSWA's website. Next slide. And another example of monitoring and reporting that WPACs do is the Leica, Lakeland Industry and Community Associations, community-based monitoring program. So this one engages with communities and citizens in the watershed and gets them involved in collecting the samples and being really hands-on in the program. So the Leica Watershed Group has partnered with the Alberta Lake Management Society and local volunteers to conduct lake monitoring at several recreational lakes around Bonnyville Cold Lake region as a part of the bigger Elms Lake Watch program. And we participate in the Lake Watch program as well up in the Lesser Slave. So this program leverages resources and staff from Elms, from Leica, and engages with local volunteers who help by providing boat transportation and aiding in collecting the samples. And the results of this program are written up by the Elms staff and included in the Lake Watch reports each year on the Elms website. So this program's a really great example of taking a science-based program and getting some community members involved. And that is one of my goals in our watershed as well, is to find a way to engage our First Nations communities along the lake and some of our smaller hamlets with they have lots of local folks interested in being a part of watershed science. And this is a great example of doing just that. In addition to water quality monitoring, Petra mentioned the Riparian Web Portal. So monitoring and reporting on the health of our riparian areas is another example. And the benthic invertebrate assessment is also another example of collecting on a different suite of indicators. So benthic invertebrate health. So there's lots of monitoring and reporting going on across the province by all of our WPACs and our partners like Elms and Cows and Fish, and Fiera Biological has done a lot of the riparian assessment work. And there's lots of opportunities to leverage resources, leverage staff expertise, and just get more done with what we have available to us. So I would suggest that if you're interested in particular monitoring projects, there's 11 WPACs and we all have really great websites, so check those out. And this is my last slide, so I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter, who is Shannon Frank, and she's the Executive Director with the Old Man Watershed Council, and she's going to be talking about WPACs and our role in policy and planning.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm joining you from Lethbridge, the home of the Niitsitapi people or Blackfoot. So WPACs have a key deliverable to provide watershed management plans. This is outlined in the government's Water for Life Action Plan. So these plans are about our collective action on issues related to watershed management and health. So the idea is that we all work together as a community to contribute our goals and our actions that we'll work towards together. The plans also provide advice to governments and decision makers around what they can do, because they do have a lot of authority and power in resource management. What we find that really as WPAC, so is that, again, that convening power, getting everybody working together towards those shared goals. Next slide, please. A key part of what we do is also provide advice to governments and decision makers. So usually we do this through written advice, presentations, participating on committees or public engagement processes. Often we're invited to participate in workshops and meetings about various issues, and we have a strong role to play there. These are just some examples of things we've worked on in the past, and you'll see here the South Saskatchewan Regional Plan is a big one, of course, with regional plans for each watershed coming through time. I know in the Old Man and the Bow, we worked a lot on this and contributing our recommendations, and really advocated to protect the headwaters, the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. And we did see that come through in the plan. That was a big focus. So it's really nice when we can see our impact and our recommendations being used, of course. And even since then, there's been a lot of sub-regional planning in the South coming out of this master plan. For example, there is a land footprint plan and a recreation management plan for key areas in the Livingston Porcupine Hills. And so we're also asked to participate on those types of planning committees. There's a recreation advisory committee that we sit on, for example. So really we have a big role to play in all these various groups. And through that, we usually end up also working collaboratively with governments on education and restoration programs to actually implement these plans. So some of the examples here are also shown as the wetland policy was very important. Coal policy, of course, was a big debate that many WPACs provided information on, and aquatic invasive species. Next slide, please. So through the Alberta Water Council, which is a provincial nonprofit that works primarily on policy and planning and tool making, we also participate on a lot of their project teams. We have a seat on their board of directors as well for WPACs. So these are some examples of some of the project teams that we participated on. We provide input to, such as the Water for Life implementation review to kind of track how we're achieving our goals as a collaborative across Alberta. The wetland policy was a big one as well. Drinking water protection, of course, is critical, and multi-year drought. And some of these have continued, and there's more tools being developed, more collaborations. So it doesn't just end with a report. There is continuing work after through various projects. Next slide, please. So some specific examples of policy and planning tools and advice that WPACs have completed. You'll see here wetlands and riparian areas, of course, are critical areas that filter water, provide habitat. You know, everyone understands that, is really supportive of that. So there's a lot of work being done how we can better manage those key ecosystems. And then also there's an example here of a tool for how can we have more innovative ways of managing a watershed, and how can we improve watershed health with new approaches. So these are all the types of advice that we give, and again, that link directly to our education and restoration projects afterwards as well. Next slide, please. Oftentimes, some key issues will arise in the public sphere where we need to provide neutral information. So things like coal policy, of course, was a big debate. Hydraulic fracturing was another one. Gravel pits have been discussed in the past. So as these issues arise, WPACs are trustworthy sources of unbiased information. Our stakeholders, our partners rely on us to provide local perspectives on these topics, and also science in a neutral way, so that the debates can be depolarized and we can really have those difficult discussions that really think about the social, economic, and environmental factors. And we know that all of those things are important. So how do we have those challenging conversations in a neutral way? And what we do is we encourage people to learn about the topic, really think about it from all three of those lenses: social, economic, and environmental, and then make up their own mind, and then participate in public engagement processes and share their voice. So I'll hand it back now to Leah to talk about education and outreach.
Thanks to all the speakers. It's really great to see examples from across the province. And we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so much more that we could share. So I encourage you to check out the websites for each of our WPACs and our annual report that we just completed. I'm just going to wind up with the fourth role, which is around education and outreach. And again, we're really important kind of key contact for our stakeholders and our residents. As Shannon said, they look to us for really good, objective information. And also, you know, to provide them with information, basic information, like our state of the watershed reports, or what is happening in my small lake that's within the watershed. So we really excel in this. And I think this is something that we're very proud of. And we're really about multi-stakeholder engagement and reaching as many people as we can, increasing that awareness so that people can make their own decisions, as well as providing really good science to the decision makers. So the provincial governments, the municipal governments, you know, our local communities, to make sure that they have the right information so that they can make their own decisions. So I'm just going to share a few examples of some of the education and outreach we do. Obviously, you're at the webinar today, so webinars are really important, and having workshops or in-person forums. But one thing that we also do really well is using video or different mediums to share this information. These are just two examples. So from the Red Deer Watershed Alliance, they did a wonderful documentary on their source waters and the rivers that shape us, and really talk with the people within the watershed about why, you know, source waters are important to them, and then look at the bigger picture and try to put it in context. Another great example is from the Mighty Peace, where they did some specific stream bank restoration with a local landowner. And I love seeing this video because you get to see the landowner kind of talk through the phases of what they did and kind of his thoughts on the project and the successes. And it really also highlights the partners. So, I mean, here you see, you know, the Agroforestry Woodlot Association was involved, Alberta Conservation Association, the County of Grand Prairie, Cows and Fish, So it really goes to point out our partnerships. We also, you know, as Petra said, we love to get out in the field. We love to get our hands dirty. We love to see people out there, you know, planting trees or doing cleanups, or, you know, pulling invasive plants, learning more about their local water body and trying to make a difference in just their day-to-day actions. So a great example here, you know, the Southeast Alberta Watershed Alliance does a lot of education and outreach. And as well, the Leica stewards have a very specific program around Keep Our Lake Blue campaign. And as you saw earlier, they do, again, community-based water quality monitoring on quite a few of their lakes. So some great programs. And as I mentioned, you know, we have our Watershed Wednesday series, but there's many other of the WPACs that do in-person forums. And the Bull River is one that really does a lot of outreach, a lot of different forums. They have committees that get together and talk about land use policy and, you know, water quality and science that's going on. They do a lot of collaborative work with their academia or local academia, like SAIT, where they did a water reuse project for them. So very local, specific kind of issues. And again, we do love to get people together and to share information whenever we can. And then, of course, we can't have to highlight, you know, we do have our websites, and really they are the best way to get information. So, you know, check out some of our websites, which are covered in our summary report. So there's links to all of our websites and all of our annual reports in the one summary document. And just as an idea, like our websites reach thousands of Albertans. And I mean, I didn't collect all of the analytics, but for the North Saskatchewan, we get 800 new visitors every month to our website looking for information or trying to find or connect with other organizations that are interested in watershed health. So we do reach a lot of people. And even more so, you know, with our newsletters and our social media. So with our newsletters or, you know, our regular blogs, our connections with our membership or our subscribers, we reach over 4,300 people almost on a monthly basis, sharing information about not only what's happening in our watersheds, but across the province. And on social media, we just added this up as part of our summary document, is we reach about 42,000 Albertans who have belonged to our social media networks. So we really recognize this and recognize the power in being able to get information to the people all across Alberta. So just to wind up, and again, that's a lot to cover in 1 hour, but again, our key responsibilities, we're conveners, collaborators. We do monitoring and reporting. We policy and planning, and our education and outreach, which again is kind of important to us in making sure that people get good scientific objective information. Again, I'd point you to our brochure and our summary report that we just completed if you want to get some more information, and it does have the website links to each of the WPACs and each of our annual reports, which are stories in themselves. So I encourage you to take a look at them. Now, before we close off, and I know we only have about a minute left, is that we always do like to present a gift basket to an attendee. And today, our lucky winner is Rob Merritt. So Rob, if you could hang on after the webinar ends, we'll get your address and be able to send you a wonderful gift basket.
Sure.
Awesome. And with that, Michelle or Mary Ellen, I know we're close to the end, but were there any questions that we'd like to tackle?
Not too many, but if folks want to take a moment to add anything here, we did have a question here from Catherine Pierce, who was wondering about invasive species and wondering if there are any policy or planning documents from the WPACs that we can use to guide prevention of invasive species in Alberta. And then Petra, right on the heels, so quick. Awesome. Thank you, Petra, for responding with a report from the Alberta Water Council. And then she also popped a question in there about interested to know what everyone thinks WPACs should be doing more of. If that's related to invasive species, we'd love to hear your feedback on that. We are having, as Leah mentioned, the Invasive Species Forum next month. So if we can, address some of that interest in that forum, that would be really great. I think, oh, and then we do actually have a question here from from Kendra, who said no youth education, which I know is not. Oh, that wasn't a direct message, sorry. Yeah, so getting some questions here in the background, sorry about that, folks. But yeah, I know that we are as WPAC World are involved with youth education. Maybe we didn't cover it here today, but if somebody wanted to take a second to address that, then I'm sure other people would be interested.
Absolutely. And Kendra, yes, of course. I mean, we do youth education. So Battle River Watershed Alliance is a great example of that. Caring for Our Watersheds, which is a kind of a provincial program. I know Leica does quite a bit of youth education, as well as Megan up at Lesser Slave. So it is tough to do a summary. I wish I could get a slide about everything we did, but I did miss that one. So we do a lot of youth education, and we work with other organizations that do great education programs, such as, the Alberta Environmental Educators of Alberta. So we also promote the resources that are there. So, well, thank you guys so much for all the great questions. And Catherine, yes, hopefully we'll have a deeper discussion on invasives at our next webinar. But again, thanks to everybody for attending from all across the province. This recording will be posted, so if you want to share it with people, please do. And thank you again to the speakers. So Petra and Megan and Shannon, thank you so much for taking the time to share some of the great examples from across the province.
Thank you for inviting us.
No problem. Thanks again.